We spent a week in Jordan, flying from Hong Kong via Doha, where we spent the night, to Amman. Jordan appears to be the only semi-stable country in the region, and we hoped it would stay that way while we were there. The Grand Hyatt was reasonably comfortable, and the view from our room. We went downstairs to have some lunch in the Italian restaurant, and it was a very nice patio area down there, and you could see minarets in the distance. The calls to prayer did not disturb us. Next morning, up early, we set off for Jerash with our driver, Joseph or Yusuf, in his comfortable Hyundai Sonata car. Linda's ankle was still sore, and she was very brave about it. A couple of pics to set the scene. As you can see, the architecture is pretty bland. It's all white and very square. And Joseph was a Jordanian from Palestine, but had spent 12 years in Texas, as you can tell.
The one in the south is called the headwaters ring, or the main one.
Before reaching Jerash, we stop at Aljun to look at the castle. The castle was built by Saladin to keep out Richard the Lionheart and his crusaders, which it did successfully, but was badly damaged by the Mongols and has since been somewhat restored. We had a nice local guide who told me he was 66, was somewhat surprised when I was older than he was. Linda, in spite of her bad ankle, was brave enough to do the whole tour. The entrance and what was the drawbridge and moat in the background, and we make our way up the steps along the narrow vaulted walkways towards the tower. On the way up, we pass carvings of what were pigeons, which were extensively used to communicate with other parts of the Middle East at that time.
5 loaves of bread. You know that story.
5 loaves
Jesus' miracle, he feed 5,000 people by 2 fishes, 5 loaves of bread. You know that story.
Yeah,
it has happened in.
Our guide explains the parable of the 5 fishes and 5 loaves of bread feeding the 5,000.
Or Sea of Galilee.
In the distance we see Golan Heights.
That way it is in Nazareth, north of Palestine.
Nazareth.
If the weather good, you can see the Hermon Mountain, Lebanon. And you can see.
Having made it to the top of the tower and seen the wonderful view of the Jordan Valley, we then set off for Jerash. Our first stop was Hadrian's Arch, built in AD 129 to commemorate Hadrian's visit. Hadrian, a much-travelled man, also of course built the wall between England and Scotland. We then drive to the south gate where we enter the complex. Having entered to the south gate, we then go to the Temple of Zeus.
Back to the 1st century BC, to the Greek time. But this was rebuilt again, reorganized by the Roman to be.
Next, it's the Oval Forum, which once supported the lower terraces of the Temple of Zeus and is perhaps the most dramatic site of the ancient city. Next, you get a bird's eye view of the area, and going away in the distance is the Cardo, which was the main thoroughfare through the archaeological park. Further views of the Oval Forum, and then behind us are the ruins of the Temple of Zeus.
The holy place.
And looking back, we see the Hadrian's Arch and the Hippodrome, where they still do chariot racing. A thistle is spotted. Perhaps Hadrian left it after his visit. And then we move to the South Theatre and wait for a show. And sure enough, there it comes. Pipers from Scotland, perhaps. in the car on a drive to Mountain Breeze, quite a long one, for a special lunch at $45, which was rather too much for us, but we did have a special visitor, a cat. A peaceful night in the Hyatt Hotel, and day 2 it's off to Petra with a start at the St. George Greek Orthodox Church. The church is in Madaba and was quite pleasant. The church was only built in 1822, so not quite sure why it's on the tour. And it's certainly not the oldest church in Jordan. Afterwards, a visit to the local facilities, and I was not quite sure whether it was 2 people sharing or take it in turn. On our way to Mount Nebo, we stopped at a ceramics shop and watched the mosaics being made for chairs and tables and jewelry and all sorts of other small items. Linda took a seat while I did the shopping. Mount Nebo is where Moses was given the tablet, which he then carried down to the people below. And it is a great lookout point as you look over the Jordan Valley, and on a clear day you can actually see Jerusalem. Unfortunately, today was not one of those. You can also see Hebron and Jericho and Nablus and Bethlehem. And it wasn't clear to me exactly where the road to the pilgrims took was.
Towards the Dead Sea.
That was our first view of the Dead Sea, and if you look carefully you can see the river that is the border between Palestine and Jordan, and this is the Jordan Valley.
Okay, thank you.
There was a Catholic church at the top, and the Pope had visited not that long ago. Now we set off for the Dead Sea, and you can see it in the distance. Here we are beside the Dead Sea, and you can see the salt at the bottom of the rocks. We have now climbed up the 400 meters from the Dead Sea, which is 400 meters below sea level, and the road became much narrower and very twisty. However, after 2 hours we reached Petra and our hotel, the Movenpick, which was quite comfortable. Petra, of course, was the highlight of our tour, and as I have already done a video, this was a shortened version of our visit. Before 8 a.m. we set off on our golf cart to go through the mile-long canyon. In the Seek, as it's called, the light shines on the rocks and creates the most beautiful colors in the sandstone. And then we come to the treasury, which is the highlight, and the buildings were hewn out of the rocks by the Nabateans 2,000 years ago. There was a theatre built in the Roman style by the Nabateans, who had great respect for them. We then switch our mode of transport to mule. Linda is posted onto her steed while I walk behind this point. We had a very scary ride up to see the monastery, which in fact Linda couldn't see because she had to walk down to it with her bad ankle. It was very steep and over rocks and up steps, but the mules were very sure-footed, and I did have confidence in them. On the way down, the muleteer took some shots of us. It was a great relief to be at the bottom, and then we had a swim in a very cold pool. Next day, it was back to the Dead Sea on the desert route, which was slightly less narrow and not so twisty. After a 2 or 3 hour drive, Joseph deposited us at the Kempinski Hotel, which, as you can see, is the lowest point on earth. The balcony of our room from the pool and the pool from our balcony, both of which, with the heat, were pretty hard to use. There were trees and bushes around the pool to make it very secluded, and from our room we could see the Dead Sea in the distance. and with the sun going down over Palestine. Day 6, a day of rest and a special day, as early in the morning we stagger down to the Dead Sea. And on the beach, apart from swimming, the idea is to mud up with local mud coming out of the urn you can see. But before that, we have to get wet. Linda is helped into the water by a mud upper as it's quite rocky by the shore. For me, it's returning to the promised land, as 80 years ago I was baptized with water from the Dead Sea. So now it's full circle. With all the minerals and salt, it's so easy to float. Perhaps I did that at my baptism. Now it was our turn to mud up, and some of us got muddier than others. And I'm not sure I felt any better or worse for it. But I did it again next morning on my own. And after that experience, it was time for a Campari and orange by the pool. Then we watched Meghan and Harry getting married and did a tour of other parts of the hotel that we hadn't seen, looking down on the main swimming pool and the breakfast restaurant, which was very pleasant. Quite a number of girls and boys were smoking pipes, and there was a selection you could choose from. So that brought us to the end of our rest day, and as you can see, it's 41 degrees at 10 o'clock at night. Our last day and a tour of downtown Amman. We opted for a 1.5 hour tour, although Joseph said it usually took him 6. Pretty crowded, as you see, and not much space for gardens, but there are 5 million people living there. First stop, the Roman Theatre. Not terribly exciting. There wasn't a lot to see other than seats, and it was pretty hot. Waiting again for the show, but there were no pipers this time. A very boring museum, and then it was on to the Citadel, where the guide refused to take us because we said we only wanted to go for 15 minutes. He said he only did an hour and a half. 15 minutes was definitely enough, and we had a better view of the Roman Theatre from there than we did when we were at the theatre. Next morning, it was goodbye to Joseph, who I think was fed up with us anyway, and the Royal Jordanian direct flight to London, a great trip.